this is Megan Ackman's research project. Let's go to Megan for the questions.
So Lauren, my questions for the research project center around bell work. How does bell work positively or negatively impact student learning, student progress, and I specifically look at their test scores. And what kind of different bell works do students respond to? That question kind of came up later in my bell work research project, and we'll look at those results in a bit.
Megan, can you give us an introduction on your research project?
Thanks, Lauren, for that introduction. So my research project was centered around the idea of bell work. In high school and middle school, I always had bell work as a student. Not always, but a lot of my history classes did bell work. We're taught about it in our classroom management class, and mostly for classroom management style. And then when I observed other classes for the College of Education, I saw a lot of bell work happening when I observed an Algebra 2 class in my Level 1. My Level 3 class with Camp Miar, he did bell work every day with his students. And then when I got to Miss Laughlin's class at Norman High, she didn't use bell work, and I thought that was really interesting. Because especially history class, I felt like we did a lot of bell work, and in my English classes. And I never asked her that, but that was one of my curiosities as to why she didn't. And that kind of brought it more into, does bell work have an effect on student performance? Like a good effect, a positive, negative effect on it? Is it more of a classroom management style technique for that? And that's kind of where my mind went for this question, was what's an easy thing to research? I was like, there's going to be plenty of literature on it, I'm sure, because I did a lot of bell work as a student. And when I asked Miss Laughlin about it, she goes, I tried it, blah, blah. And JR also inputted that he did bell work. They tried a lot of different styles. So I was really interested, is there any effect on student performance, or do students learn more? Do they retain more information? And that's really where I went for this project.
Megan, can you tell us about that background literature on your research project?
Yeah, so I have several pieces of literature that we can look at, and what I helped use for my research project. There wasn't a lot of research specifically on what I was looking for, which was bell work and student performance. Several of it that I'm going to be talking about is use it as classroom management. One case is specifically for special ed, but we're going to go ahead and start with that one. So one of the articles I found was published in 2018, and it's Teaching Transition Self-Determination Knowledge and Skills Using the Me Bell Ringers. And what that basically talked about is how special ed teachers don't have a lot of support to transition their special ed students into kind of adult life, like what to do after high school or after school in general. And so these bell ringers, they would use every Tuesday or every day, and they would ask questions to the students about disabilities, like what do they know about it. So some of the questions they used was, I have an IEP, yes, I think, not sure, no. Or I know I'm in special education. Another one is like, people with disabilities get good jobs after high school. So this really opened up discussion for the special ed teachers and special ed students to talk about their transition. What are they going to do after school? Because, what I learned in the College of Ed is that special education, you're really helping these students get the skills they need for life after school. So whether that's just going to be basic math skills, basic speaking skills, or writing skills, stuff like that. So this Me scale or Me bell ringer would help them be able to transition their students a lot easier, because they don't have that kind of support normally. And they found that it really helped. It was a really good, effective mean. And they say to teach self-determination oriented transition skills, without affecting academic curriculum time. So they can also go ahead and teach what they need to teach to them, but also make sure that these thoughts are in their minds for the special ed students. So that was one of the literature pieces I found. Another one is actually a blog, one of the teacher blogs I found. It's KesslerScience.com. Not the most reliable, I know, but it's titled 5 Reasons Why Warm-Ups and Bell Ringers Were a Failure in My Classroom. And I thought this was really interesting because what I will talk about later is some of the mistakes I made within this research. It's a mini research project anyways. So his first reason, he's a science teacher, obviously, and he said, I didn't value the warm-up process. So he talked about how he was always worried about his lesson, so he never really prepared the bell ringers in advance. It was he was always scrambling. So his second was, I seem to always be scrambling for content. He never really knew what to put for his bell ringers. Number 3 was content wasn't meaningful to students. So if it's just a question with like multiple choice, they can really write down A, and that's not going to help them study. It's not going to help them when they look over it, like, what was that question? What was the answer? Number 4 was students didn't have a procedure. So he never was consistent about it, which I'll talk about how I was not consistent with it either. And so you can't really expect students to just walk in and just start doing it if you don't have them do it every day. That's not really an expectation I set. That's not an expectation he set for it. And that's what other teachers do in their classes that make it successful. And then number 5, he put, I didn't have a procedure. So he would just give them a data completion grade, which presented problems because it was just easy for students to write stuff down right before they turned it in, and then he had to grade all of them on a Friday. And so I really enjoyed it because then he just lists resources on what would be a good way to do bell ringers. And I thought that was important to bring up because mine wasn't necessarily successful or a failure, but it'd be really useful for people who want to plan bell ringers out. And I think that one was really useful. Even though it was not peer-reviewed or anything, it's still a teacher, and he tried it, and he failed, and he wanted people to learn from that. So another piece of literature I looked at was titled Designing Inquiry Starters by Barry Kluger-Bell. And it's very science education based, it's from NASA. But they talk about the Institute for Inquiry, so science education. It's basically how do you get students, they talk about undergrads and like graduate students, but how do you get students interested in what you're going to be learning? And so it really talked about how you need to have goals. Like, what do you want them to know? That can easily be translated to any classroom. What do you want the students to know? Like, what are those essential questions you want? What do you want them to get out of it? And this is a lot more in depth than just a bell ringer I would do. This is more like a starter lesson into like a bigger lesson or a bigger experiment. But I still think the notions are the same. So basically, to have successful inquiry starters, you need to know, what do you want the students to know? Why is that important? How does that relate, basically? And another point within it, in the 6.3, it talked about matching activity design to goals. So activity design is like, what experiment are they going to do? But that's easily just relatable to what you're going to match that day's lesson and that day's bell work to whatever goal I want them to achieve that day. It's probably the most beneficial, and it's most beneficial for designing inquiry, getting students more interested, having them ask questions about stuff. So that's what that one was about. My fourth literature piece that I looked at was from November 2011 by Michael Romano. It's the New Teacher's Toolbox, and it's titled The Beauty of Bell Ringers. And this really talked about using bell ringers in classroom management. They give like this little scenario of, imagine you walk in, you have to yell over your students to get their attention, you've wasted 10 minutes just trying to get them to settle down. So if you use a bell ringer and you establish that consistent routine with them, they will easily eventually walk in, sit down, and start their work. So tips they have are capture their attention. Obviously, that's one thing I learned. If it's boring, they're going to quickly do it or brush it off, wait till we all go over it. Prep their brains, so you can either prepare them for the day's lesson or review from the day before's lesson. Especially maybe for a big test, have a nice like research question that really makes them think about it. And always just be able to adapt to whatever's happening within the classroom. So this article is very much for first year teachers, which is obviously what I will be soon and what a lot of us will be soon. And so I think that it was really short, just one page. So it's really nice. I could just find something just simply about bell work. This was probably the most on topic of what I wanted to look for. With the other ones, I kind of had to like pick and choose what I needed from those articles, but this one was really good. They're just describing what I saw in my class very easily. So for my last piece of literature, I actually had to go the other way with it. I actually started searching for exit slips, articles on those, which is just at the end of the hour or the end of the class, students will write something and hand it into the teacher as they walk out usually. Because those are pretty similar. It's a similar idea, I believed. So I found an article. It's called "The Classroom is Alive with the Sound of Thinking: The Power of the Exit Slip" by Rebecca Lee at Oakland University, published in 2012. But this was talking about how they used exit slips in a class for undergrads wanting to become teachers. So like in the College of Ed, like if Dr. Hetty used exit slips as we walked out. So their question was, how can college teachers help students to think critically about content? Basically, so this was an education class, so how can these students have like reflective conversation about these? So this is about like encouraging teachers to engage in reflective practice, which is what we actually often do at OU. And so for this study, they found that it really did help these students respond to the questions they were asked. They didn't do it all the time because they had classes of like hundreds, like, you know, those big U.S. history classes at OU. But they stated it's not how often you use these, but how you use them. So just picking and choosing when you use these exit slips. For this study, it indicated that they did want the students to be heard. So they didn't do it often, and it also helped the students reflect. So if you really wanted them to reflect after a certain lesson, you'd have them do an exit slip, which can easily be applied to the classroom. So say we had a lesson and then the next day the bell ringer could be a very reflective piece, whether even if it's just on like, so we just did a group assignment, like reflect on how well you did, how the project was in itself, because I noticed that with my immigration project, not a lot of students did that great. So like, do they think they deserve a higher grade? Kind of very self-grading almost, but it's very self-reflective. Like, did I do what needed to be done? What did I get out of it? Very much a just reflection assignment that you have students do. So this isn't saying that you should do it all the time. Granted, they did it with college students, so it's very different maturity level, different responsibilities, and different levels of motivation. But I think bringing out that reflective piece where it doesn't necessarily, the bell ringers don't need to be content-based, but they could be very, very reflective. I think that would be really good for students. So it's not necessarily about bell ringers, but you can easily apply this to bell ringers.
Megan, can you tell us about your method of inquiry? Basically, what'd you do?
Thanks, Lauren. I'll tell you exactly what I did. So, from the get-go, had to come up with bell ringers. So my unit was on, what was it on? Progressives. And I already did a unit with the CP class, and that was who I did the study with. I did it with the CP US History, so usually 16, 17-year-olds, 11th graders at Norman High. So I had to create bell work for them. It was kind of the first step. And then what was I going to look at to see progress and data? So I knew test scores would be an easy one because I also taught their last unit. So seeing their unit scores, unit test scores from test 2 to test 3, look at those. I also provided a survey for them at the very end on bell work, how often they had bell work in school, what did they like the best about bell work. And so I would have bell work. I just did not do it every morning. So when they had days to work on projects or stuff that they had the day before, I never had bell work for them. So it was not consistent, which was the first mistake. Also, they were very hesitant against bell work. They thought it was really dumb. So it was kind of discouraging. But this also just happened in the middle of the year. In the middle of October, they had not been doing this the whole time. So how could I expect them to do this automatically when they walked in? I wasn't necessarily looking at it as a classroom management thing, but it is still important to note that it didn't really get off on being good classroom management because it wasn't consistent. I tried to vary the questions of bell work I had. So some of them I included just questions like, what do you know about progressives? What do you know about women's suffrage? What happened? And then we talk a lot about political cartoons. So I brought one in, didn't even teach them the content, and said, what is this about? Identified symbols within it, which I could tell informally they knew political cartoons. And then I included an image saying, what is this about? And they got most of it. It was about prohibition, and it said, like, wet or dry, had a picture of a family, all sad, like, you have to vote no against alcohol, it'll ruin us. And then the other side is, like, this big fat guy that worked at a brewery and was like, we need the money, so we do want alcohol. So they could easily get that. They didn't necessarily know prohibition meant the alcohol debate. So we worked through that. So I tried to bring in more interactive ones, not just questions they can write down or wait for someone else to just say the answer. Because we would also go over the bell work eventually together as a class after I gave them a few minutes in the beginning. Because I wanted to talk about it as a group so they knew it was just like not whatever. That it was just up there because I had to do a research project for OU. And I could tell that a lot of the bell work, the interactive stuff was a lot better because they were more into it. It wasn't just boring questions. So I think those are really good. So then once I got the bell work, I collected their bell work after the test day. So that was me being able to analyze the data of just what they put down for the bell work. And a lot of people, they wouldn't go in depth with it. Granted, these were very level 1 questions, just very surface, like, what is women's suffrage? Not like, what was the point behind women's suffrage? Like, why would it be such a big deal back in the day? Questions like that, going more deeper within, so them actually having to think deeper about it. So I can't really be mad about that. They weren't really hard questions. And I think I had a problem with what the science article was talking about is I never really prepared them well enough, I don't think. And that's just self-reflection on myself, obviously. But So that was some of it. Um, and then when we did test scores, we got test scores back, which I apparently made the test harder, but whatever. And then I was just, another part of the just collecting data was just observing their reactions to it, reading what they wrote in the survey on their bell work, and then looking at test scores and stuff.
Megan, can you tell us about your findings?
Of course I will tell you about my findings, Lauren. So basically what I found within this research project is within the surveys, students really appreciated more of the pictures, more images of bell work in general, more interactive ones, I think. Just the plain questions ones just didn't stick with them. They didn't really remember them as well, and I don't think that didn't really help with them remembering the content in the first place. I did use some of the bell ringers just so I can know how much they knew about it, like women's suffrage. I would assume they all know about it, but they didn't necessarily know what amendment it was or what the term really was. Another thing is that it didn't really affect test scores that much. They were pretty similar to their old test scores across the board. I had some people do better, some people do worse, but they had that same kind of thing happen between the first test and the second test. Granted, I think the first test I made was a lot easier. They said that the second test was harder. Don't know what that means, but their test scores are still pretty on average for what they usually would make. I did notice I brought in the bell work into their short answer questions a lot more. So I asked them what is the progressive error, like what were some problems, and that was one of their bell work questions, and they all did really well at that. Another one was we did a Socratic seminar, and that was one of their short answers, and they did really well on that, which I think they do better on short answer prompts anyways, so I think that would be really interesting to bring into bell work in general. Just have them write a short answer, just have like, I know Miss Hoffman wants to do a DBQ for them for their test next, so just bringing in even some AP short answer questions, seeing what they make of it on a bell work, and be like, all right, like it would be like an introduction to a unit, and maybe like the last bell work, and be like, what has changed, and they can help them study for the test, I think. Another thing is that some students didn't really have bell work in other classes. It's very dependent on the teacher. I felt like I had a lot of bell work as a student, whether that just might be the teachers I happened to get, or it's the culture of my high school that they did a lot of bell work, or maybe back when I was in high school, bell work was a bigger thing, which not a lot of my research really told me a lot about that, which I would like to know more about. And I don't necessarily think a school would push it that much, but it's just very interesting. I had bell work at least every year in high school. And some kids just said this class, which I thought was really interesting. And the ones who said they had it often, I mean, they had more thorough bell answers, but not really. What else did I find? I think bell work as a whole, I can see why people do it for classroom management. I didn't necessarily see it impacting student learning or student test performance, but I also don't think maybe the bell work wasn't necessarily good. I also didn't do it consistently. So that's just kind of that's on me as a researcher. It probably wasn't the best research or research experiment project set up for success. But it'd be really helpful for classroom management. Not that I have a problem, but I can see why other teachers at other grade levels would use it. My 11th graders are usually always, I tell them to put a phone up, they put a phone up. But I could see like sophomores or freshmen, like, you need to come in, put everything away, get your notebook out, and start your bell work. Kind of just teaching them this is how you're a responsible student.
Megan, can you give us a conclusion about your research project?
So basically what I learned from this teacher action research project is I'm not a very good researcher automatically. It's really hard to come up with what you're going to look for, what data are you looking for, how do you analyze this data. And it's really hard because you have such a specific question in mind. There's usually not a lot of literature on it. I had to really expand on that. So if I ever want to get a master's or a PhD, might have some trouble with that because researching wasn't the most fun I've ever had. But I have to be more interested in actually doing this bell work kind of research. Maybe 1 year don't do bell work, or 1 semester don't do bell work, like do bell work, and then next semester don't do bell work, and like see what happens. Also, what I learned is probably just depending on what grade I get or what, I don't know. I didn't really see a difference in bell work. I don't know if I would use it in my classroom. I think it's very much up to the teacher. How do they want their classroom to be managed? How are they going to use bell work? What kind of bell work are you going to use? I think if you could use it in a fun, creative, interactive way, you will get a lot more students in on it, and I think it will really help them learn. Like just use like more guided inquiry or more deeper thinking skills. Really have a purpose in what you want the bell work to achieve. Really focus in how is it going to tie in with the lesson that day, or the lesson from yesterday, or the lesson tomorrow. I think as a first year teacher, it'd be really hard to do that because you're already going to be freaking out over lessons, planning your lessons every single day, getting stuff you need. But maybe like 2-3 years into it, be like, okay, I know how to be a teacher decently now. So maybe I can really start doing this bell work thing really well. I want to challenge my students with it, challenge myself as an educator with it, and doing different kinds of bell works, or exit slips even. So I really like that reflective piece on students reflecting on themselves or reflecting on what they learned. So maybe not just having it in their notes. I think it's also, it could be a really good, just easy daily grade for them because they all care about grades even though they shouldn't. But even in the process of it just being a nice, easy grade to get, it can really get them thinking, and they do have to work hard for an answer. So I think in the future I can easily do bell work. I don't know if I would do it right off the bat. Didn't necessarily see a testing change or a student learning change. But from what I've seen within the classroom, just more interactive, like the Socratic seminar, the debates, they all really remembered it. So that needs to go within the bell work, and I think they would really benefit from those types of bell works. Wasn't the best research I've ever done in my life, but hopefully this helps me and helps future educators really learn about bell work and the effect it can have on students. So thank you, Lauren, for having me on my own teacher action research project. It's been fun, and I hope Lauren has fun with this in 1 year.
Wow, Megan, thank you so much for that wonderful project. I'm Lauren Llewellyn, and this has been Megan Hackman's Teacher Action Research Project.